Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. And this week, we have with us Armin Mandara from Austria. Hey, Armin. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Vasco. Thanks for having me.
We were just talking in prep with Armin about the place in Austria where he's from, of course, from Linz, just southeast of Munich, I guess, right?
It's exactly between Vienna and Munich, like halfway in between. And it's a very beautiful city I'm living in. I was born here. I was raised here. I stayed here. It's really nice.
And I have to say that I do miss traveling through Austria. Armin is the head of Scrum Masters at IBM iX, a leading digital agency. With a career spanning 7 years as a Scrum Master, Armin has partnered with many teams to successfully deliver top quality digital products. And his passion lies in enabling teams to achieve their goals and, of course, unleash their potential, which is just perfect for a Scrum Master, I would say. So, Armin, that was a short intro. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master?
Hey, sure. So how I became a Scrum Master is certainly, it's not a straightforward journey and the result of many lucky circumstances falling into place, I would say. So I started my career back when I was 15 as an apprentice in computer science. And an apprenticeship, it's quite a common career path in Austria that you work at a company, you learn the profession on the go, if you will, and you also attend a vocational school on the side. So there I was as a teenager, passionate about web development and these kind of topics. So I started with web development, learning HTML, CSS. I programmed with Visual Basic.net back in the days over 15
When it was cool, right?
When it was cool, exactly. When it was still a thing. And these were my first steps in my professional career. And afterwards, I went to uni and I wanted to learn about other things, actually. I was started to get more interested in economical topics, politics, growing up, becoming an early adult. And I thought that maybe this web development thing is not exactly my thing. And I want to do something more with communication. That was what I had in mind. So I tried a few degrees. I was in the social economics, cultural studies, like kind of figuring out my way forward. And eventually I started working in some advertisement agency and in the PR area because, assuming that I want to do something with communication, of course, you go to marketing, PR types of jobs. And it was nice. It was cool. I made my first learnings there, but it felt like it was still not really my passion. And it was around the same time where a very good friend of mine, actually one of my best friends, he was becoming a Scrum Master in his company. And we would often meet for dinners, drinks, and talk about work, life, what friends talk about. And he would talk about his job in a big passion and would tell me all the amazing things that he does and that he's involved with and that how he can help his teams, etc.
So he made you curious.
Well, initially, I thought it was interesting indeed, but what triggered my curiosity was when he said that he thinks that I would be a great Scrum Master.
Oh, so he had an insight you hadn't discovered yet.
Exactly. So, but it was more or less always just a side note that he dropped. Until one day, I remember it very clearly. It was in the fall of 2016. And I myself, I was in between jobs. I was quitting at a advertising agency where I worked with and where things were not exactly right, and kind of figuring out what to do next. And I get a call from him, and he tells me, Armin, I talked to my boss and we talked about ideas for next year, and we want to hire another Scrum Master. And I was thinking about you. What do you say?
So he was clearly training you.
He was maybe mentally preparing me for what would come. And there I was standing like, hey, Chris, shout out to Chris, by the way, at this point. Thanks for thinking about me, but what is it again that a Scrum Master does? So I was a bit, of course, I was honored that he thought of me. But then I did more research into the role and into the overall topic. And then I myself got the insight, like, wait a minute, maybe it's exactly what I was looking for in terms of doing something with communication, but still combines my passion for technology that I still had, because that was still my first professional love, if you will. Exactly. I was doing web development when since I was a teenager. But back then at school, we didn't learn about Scrum. We didn't learn about agile. That was
now, of course, and many schools still don't teach about the Scrum or agile, which is quite incredible to my eyes.
Indeed, yeah. So we've learned a lot about classical models back then in school, but the first time I heard about Scrum was actually from Chris. So yeah, and then I learned more about the role. I did look into it. I met the team even before I signed the contract. So he brought me to the company. I met the people. I met my future boss, and we were both like, let's give it a try. I'm interested. I want to see where this is going. They were also like, we're willing to give you a chance, so let's do it. And that's how I ended up becoming a Scrum Master.
So I'm also very interested in seeing how this is going, Armin, because of course now we're going to talk about the failure story. And you started a little bit. So many Scrum Masters start by accident, in the sense that they discover Scrum Mastery by accident. And in your case, it's quite interesting because your friend Chris discovered you could be a Scrum Master, and then you accidentally accepted it because it just fit both your past, so your experience, as well as your interest and passion for working with communication. But let's see where this goes then, Armin. Tell us that story, the difficult story. We all go through difficult stories, of course. We'll dive into the lessons learned later on, but tell us that story, Armin.
Mm-hmm. Sure. When it comes to difficulties, having early failures, I'm thinking of a specific incident. It was a few months after I started as a Scrum Master, actually. It was the third month of being a Scrum Master, so still very new to the role, still figuring out how to actually live the role and what's expected from me. And what was happening is that I was a Scrum Master in one team, and we were working in a big corporation developing ecommerce platforms. There were several teams involved. It was a scaled setup. And so we would run in Scrum, and naturally we would have retrospectives at the end of the sprint. But what we didn't have was any sort of project retrospective. So this company was still more in the, let's say, project mindset versus a product mindset.
So you had team-centric retros, but not retros for the whole group of teams. Is that what you mean?
We didn't have retros in hindsight to reflect upon how did a project go and what can we learn
so
from
for the
there.
whole project, exactly.
Yeah. So the company was still more or less acting in a project-oriented way. So when they wanted to implement some new functionality, they would trigger a project. And that's a separate issue we could talk about. But still, we would do a project. We would build the functionality, and when it was done, it was done. And we had the idea, and that's what I wanted to implement, to do project retrospectives. So at the end of a project, after a couple of sprints, we gather the teams, we gather the stakeholders, we reflect upon how did it go, and what can we learn for future projects? Very simple and straightforward idea. And I did pitch it to a bigger round. And it was met positively. But I did have a follow-up meeting with 2 project managers because they couldn't attend the initial pitch. And that's where things became a bit more difficult. So here I was sitting with these 2 project managers and presenting the idea of, hey, let's do project retrospectives. And I started with explaining the why. Why should we do this? Why is this beneficial, etc. And one of the project managers, he made a comment, just skip that part. You don't have to sell it to us. And he did it in quite some harsh undertone.
Okay,
and
so
I
like
felt
condescending or patronizing.
Exactly. So I still proceeded with my presentation, but I noticed that I got more and more nervous, and I think I was still very early in my Scrum Master career, working in this big corporation and still figuring out the role and the expectations. And at the end of the presentation, we talked about it, and they didn't seem very enthusiastic about the idea, and I didn't feel much support on their end. And afterwards, I was feeling very terrible, and I was almost having an existential crisis in terms of, what am I doing? Is this the right thing? Do I have a supportive environment? So just mentally, it was a very difficult situation, because it was still very uncertain, everything for me. And there I was facing resistance in a very clear manner. So what I did, and what was helpful for me, was first of all having a few colleagues and a few people I trusted who I could talk with. Chris, of course, being one of them. We talked a lot about the problems that I was facing, and he was giving me great advice. So I think, especially for new Scrum Masters, that's something relevant as a takeaway, that you will face resistance. Not everybody will be excited about your great ideas. Not everybody will understand them even. So be prepared for things to be difficult, and it's okay that they are difficult. Always keep in mind that the benefit that you can provide, the reasons why you trigger certain changes, and make sure that you do have some trusted colleagues, some mentors that you can talk to.
Let's take that a bit deeper, Armin. So you presented the idea. Obviously, you had seen the benefits of the retrospectives, and you felt like, okay, this is something that would benefit also at the project level, and you presented it to different people. You got, as far as I understood, a very positive, not necessarily supportive, but like welcoming and receptive response from most of the people you talked to. But then these 2 project managers kind of seemed to be resisting, and that caused of course, the need, as you said, to talk to some people you trust that could give you the support, and that's very important. I was just thinking, like, if you were back at that time with what you know today, right? Like not who you were back then, but if Armin of today would go back there and have that meeting with those 2 project managers, what would you do differently?
So, very good question. And now, being a bit older, having more experience being a professional, more experience being a Scrum Master, and also a manager and a leader, I now would have the courage to speak things out in that very moment. So what I didn't do back then is, I didn't mention how this comment came across. I didn't mention how their way of responding didn't feel very fruitful. Nowadays, I would call it out and just, play with open cards. I would comment on the fact that I don't think this was a constructive comment, and I would make it a topic also on a meta level to, how are we actually talking to each other here? So I didn't do it back then. Nowadays, I have, or I hope I would have the courage in that moment to speak things out and to call such behavior out.
Very, I think, very insightful. Also, very self-aware comment that you just made. What do you think is keeping us Scrum Masters now, kind of doing that self-reflection? What do you think is keeping us today from productively, of course, positively calling out that kind of behavior?
Mm-hmm. I believe there are several reasons, and we tell ourselves all sorts of stories to not be honest with each other. And I think one of it is, first of all, we think if we say what's on our mind, we could cause a scene. We could make something a topic that we don't want to make a topic. We don't want to come across as somebody who cannot get over things, who maybe takes things too seriously. And certainly also we want to keep some sort of harmony. So we have the tendency that we withhold what we actually want to say because we don't want to destroy the harmony of the situation. So I think these are the kind of reasons why we withhold our truth. Because we don't want to come across to the other person like they came across towards us.
That's an incredibly important self-reflection. And of course, getting out of that is not easy. But we need to first start with being aware when that is happening. Great story. Thank you for sharing that, Armin.
Thank you, Vasco.
Monday is about what we learn from our obstacles and our failures. But tomorrow is Team Tuesday here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. We explore teams and their journeys, the habits they develop that threaten their performance, how each of our guests help their teams evolve, and the one key lesson they learned from that experience. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.